Hello, everybody. Oh, fantastic. Welcome to everyone that is joining us for today's EDICa seminar. This seminar is part of the broader EDI caucus, which is led out of Harriet Watt, to sort of support the UK research and innovation sector, as well as the British Academy, with evidence-based reviews of equality or equity as we're moving towards diversity and inclusion practices and their implementation. I will be your half-witted host today. I am Dr. Clay Magill, and I am an assistant, or rather, I just got promoted, associate professor of biogeochemistry at Harriet Watt. You will find that I'm stepping outside my comfort zone a little bit today. I am the neurodiversity champion for the EDICa caucus. However, I've come into this from maybe a different perspective than many, meaning that my background is not in social science. And on the outside, I tend to fit a lot of the stereotypes of people that don't really foster inclusion or other EDI themes. So I'm hoping that we can make this adventure fun together. With that in mind, I was going to give you a little bit of background about EDICa. You can see some of the rules and regulations that we will be approaching here on the screen. And then I will turn it over to our speakers. So before that, as I mentioned, I want to start with a little bit of an overview. The EDI caucus, standing for Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. The equality is starting to be transitioned towards the word equity, which highlights the accessibility rather than just the availability of opportunities. In any case, the EDI caucus, or EDICa, is a national project which is being led out of Harriet Watt University and aims to bring an intersectional perspective to the multiple disadvantages which can face marginalized researchers and innovators, especially within the British or UK research and innovation sectors, but worldwide is our ultimate goal. The caucus uses a co-design approach led by those with lived experience of exclusion and marginalization to undertake and evaluate interventions designed to create equitable workplaces across the research and innovation, or R&I, ecosystems. The ultimate goal of EDICa is to support UKRI, that is the United Kingdom Research and Innovation funding body, as well as the British Academy, with evidence-based reviews of equality, diversity, and inclusion practices. With this in mind, today's seminar is an opportunity for us to showcase and promote the existing best practices in terms of research, perspectives, and opportunities, as well as to illuminate innovation and improvements upon the current status quo that spans the myriad of research and innovation sectors around the UK, including public and private enterprises, academia, industry, government, and hopefully well beyond. With all that in mind, we have two special guests joining us today to give us an overview of some EDI tools. These tools are meant to promote the accessibility, the implementation, and the conceptualization of EDI themes and implementation across the research and innovation sectors. We'll be joined by two guests, the first being Karen Grayson, who is a senior manager of diversity and inclusion at the Royal Academy of Engineering at UCL. She was formerly at Citizens Advice and has been in her current role for a little less than 6 months. And in this role, she's started to really pioneer something called the progression framework of diversity and inclusion, which she's going to give us some background on and some insights about. After that, we'll be joined by Dr. Sarah Higginson, who's at the University of Oxford, and she'll talk to us about something called the EDI cube. Cube meaning like Rubik's Cube kind of thing here, which helps researchers in the workplace culture implement, understand, and improve EDI themes in the workplace around them. What we're going to hopefully do here is start by having 10 minutes or so with Karen Grayson. We'll then pass it on to Sarah Higginson to give a 10 to 20 minute talk about the EDI cube. We'll have a short, what I'm going to call moderated session where I'll talk to both Karen and Sarah together to ask a few overview questions. And then we're hoping to have 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the seminar for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question that you cannot verbalize or you don't want to be on camera, you can put it into the chat for Zoom and we can read questions from that location and pose those questions to our speakers today. I also want to emphasize that I'm in a working lab environment, so I have the background blurred. But what that means is that you might see my PhD students, you might see colleagues and coworkers sort of moving behind me. Do your best, just as me, to make sure that we don't lose focus on what we're doing here. And I'm probably telling this to myself more than anyone else. But I want to make sure you know there might be some surprises as we move forward with this, much as any good seminar should probably have. If for whatever reason you're not able to access the chat, you can also send some emails to myself or the EDICa email address, which is, I can tell you in just a moment here. Oh, no, maybe I can't. EDI caucus, here we go. EDI caucus at hw.ac.uk, and I will be monitoring my email as will our support team of Fenella and Katrine. With all that in mind, and Clay's rambling, I think, at a momentary pause, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Grayson to give us a little bit of information and discuss something about the diversity and inclusion progression framework being pushed forward by the Royal Academy of Engineering. Please join me in welcoming Karen to the screen. Hi, Karen, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much. Hello everyone, and my name is Karen, and I'm a senior manager in the diversity and inclusion team at the Royal Academy of Engineering, and I joined in the summer. So on the one hand, I am an old hand at diversity and inclusion, and that's where I've been working over the last 17 years or so. But I'm new to the field of engineering. One of the things that I've been learning about engineering is its significance from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And I'm going to talk about the progression framework, which actually I haven't personally pioneered, but I adopted and inherited, and I'm driving forward. But I want to give all credit to former team members who actually developed that a few years back, and have redeveloped it and worked on it really hard. So I'm doing my best to live up to that bit of legacy that I've got to work on. So what I really wanted to say in the first instance is so obviously engineering is a really key employer in the UK and contributes hugely to our lives in all sorts of ways. And at the same time, it struggles with, as a profession, with a skills gap. But there is so much scope to tap into all the talents in order to draw more skilled people into engineering in both engineering projects and scientific inquiry. But we know, of course, that women, for example, are underrepresented in engineering degrees at around 18%. And that follows through to the workforce, where the proportion of women drops to 16.5%. And meanwhile, people from Black and minority ethnic groups are well represented in engineering higher education at around 34%. And yet they were only around 11.4% of the engineering workforce in 2020. And that's as compared to the total working population of people from Black and minority ethnic groups of some 28%. So all of that backdrop inspires the Academy's really serious ambitions around diversity and inclusion in engineering, and the need to ensure inclusive engineering cultures where talented people from diverse backgrounds are able to thrive really matters to engineering. And of course, an engineering profession that embraces diversity will be good both for engineers as professionals and for the end user of engineering solutions. So we have a range of programs at the Royal Academy of Engineering aimed at improving diversity and inclusion, and that ranges from a grants program for universities to supporting graduates entering the workforce, to training on inclusive leadership and an EDI platform for startups and scale-ups, all the way through to research and engagement. And we're also working hard at the Academy to embed diversity and inclusion across all our functions and our external programs. So by applying a diversity and inclusion lens and taking an increasingly structured approach through an overarching plan for the Academy, we support all our colleagues as a team to ensure that our work aligns with the Academy's diversity and inclusion ambitions. And that's where the progression framework comes in. And this is a program that we set up with a Science Council, and we work with professional engineering institutions, or PEIs, and Science Council members So we're engaging with a range of engineering and science professional bodies to embed diversity and inclusion in the workings of a profession. The progression framework establishes a structure for professional bodies to be able to address diversity and inclusion right across the range of our functions. So that extends to membership, registration, accreditation, our programs of all types, like grants, prizes, awards, and so on, in our meetings, conferences, and events, as communicators and as employers. And it's about addressing diversity and inclusion in our governance and leadership and what we monitor and measure as organisations. So we ask professional bodies to engage with diversity and inclusion considerations across their strategy, their planning and accountability, policies and practices, and insight evaluation. So there's something of a matrix where the progression framework captures what we do as professional bodies and also how we do it. And a key theme in the framework indicators is that we want to know that the organisation has a plan and that leadership routinely tracks progress using data and learning from others. There's 4 stages of development along the progression framework as our ambitions and our capabilities grow around diversity and inclusion in our organisations, from initiating to developing, engaging, and then transforming. And that progression will reflect increasing organisational leadership and commitment and the development of policies and practices as a sort of infrastructure for embedding that diversity and inclusion. And where organisations are transforming, we'll be able to see that the approach to change is focused on transforming the culture and systems of the organisation. We'll be able to see sustained senior level support with responsibility and accountability formalised, data routinely gathered and shared, high levels of dialogue, collaboration and learning, and clear evidence of change in individual behaviour and organisational culture. And what we hope is that the result of a progression framework is to support professional bodies to aspire to improving their practices and take action to move up the levels of the framework. And it will help to structure conversations internally about performance and progress, as well as identifying strengths and areas for development. And that will help professional bodies plan their next steps in making progress on diversity and inclusion. So to that end, we undertake regular benchmarking exercises with all the participating organisations, and that helps to assist them to assess their progress against the framework. And additionally, we meet as a steering group. So we have a progression framework implementation group, and that offers a forum for community of practice, mutual support, and problem solving. So our professional bodies are able to connect with and learn from other organisations in the sector, share their successes, and work to address challenges. So just to conclude, the progression framework is a really key diversity and inclusion programme at the Academy, and we're aiming to secure a more diverse profession where everyone belongs with better retention, a sustainable profession drawing on all the talents to address skills gaps, greater justice and fairer outcomes for professionals, a responsible professional infrastructure treating staff and members fairly, and more effective solutions and innovation to meet the needs of diverse end users. So thank you for your time and consideration. I'll hand back over.
Thank you, Karen. That was fantastic. You're so eloquent. It's going to make my bit here sound a little bit less well polished, but I think that did a fantastic job of capturing what the heart of today's discussion is about. I think you also opened it up to a lot of interesting points and questions for in a few minutes here. So our next speaker was hopefully going to be Dr. Sarah Higginson. However, I don't think that she has been able to make it at the moment. So a colleague of mine at EDICa, Fenella Watson, is going to share, I believe, the webpage associated with the EDI Cube, because it's actually very informative and well done. And it will set the context then for some questions and answers with Karen after we go through that website. And then I'll turn it over to you as the audience to fill in some questions as well. You just set us off so well, Karen. Thank you for doing that. Man, it sounded fantastic. Not that I'm surprised, but I'm very grateful. Fenella, I think that we're going to hand it over to you to share your screen with the EDI Cube website. And once we go through that for a little bit, I'm going to have a little bit of time with Karen to ask some questions before we open it up to everyone else. Over to you, Fenella.
Thanks, Clay. The reason why this seminar was at that short notice, about a week's notice, was because Sarah Higginson's funding is going to end at the end of this calendar year. And so that was why we were keen to kind of go ahead and push ahead. So something's obviously detained her, but the tool is really interesting. So I'm going to share my screen. So if you can just bear with me while I'm flipping back and forth. So this is the Centre for Research in Energy Demand Solutions, and one of the things that they have developed is this EDI cube. So the cube is, I'll just bring it up in a larger form, is this Rubik's Cube type shape, and it's got the 3 facets. So at the top, there's the 3 Ps: people, process, project. So who is involved? How do we do things? And what do we do? Then on the front face are the 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act of 2010. So age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, race, pregnancy or maternity, religion or belief, sex, and then sexual orientation. And the final facet is equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I wanted to touch on the difference between equality and equity. It's come up in the EDI caucus that we work in several times. What is the difference? So our caucus name was determined by what the call for funding was called. But I believe that our PI is of the opinion that it should be equity over equality. So if we look at the graphic here, on the left, there is the graphic for equality. And so you have a tall person looking over a fence. Then the middle person is not quite able to see over the fence. And then the short person has no chance of seeing over the fence. Equity is where the boxes that allow somebody to see over the fence are adjusted depending on the person's height, so that the medium person just requires a small box and the short person is the person who requires a substantial height advantage. So equality is where the same person would be given, each of the 3 people would be given the same box, whereas equity is each depending on their need. So going back to the tool, they go through what are equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's equity. The E is often used interchangeably, but they're not the same as I just described, and that it's about the availability as well as the accessibility of the opportunity. So diversity is talking about the differences, both visible and invisible. EDICa's research is definitely looking at both the invisible, like neurodivergent, but also things like chronic fatigue. So if somebody's not able to stand for long periods of time, but they look like they're perfectly fine, we're trying to do all of that. And one of our co-investigators a couple of weeks ago in a conversation was talking about how for race, for somebody of another race, that's sometimes the very first thing that somebody notices when they walk into a room, whereas for a number of the other kind of forms of diversity, like class, caste, abilities, even potentially age, it's less glaringly obvious when they walk into a room. So they say here, research shows that diverse workforces are beneficial for decision-making, innovation, and problem-solving. So we'll come further down in the page where they talk about how the cube can be used to develop those project ideas, but that informing it at the early stage is really important. It's at the bid stage, it's not further down the line after the project has been funded, especially when you're constraining those budgets. So it's looking at, how are you going to do recruitment, not just the promotion, how do you deal with the language of a project or within an institution? And finally, it comes down to I in EDI, inclusion. And one analogy that somebody had once said that I really appreciated is that diversity is inviting somebody to the dance, and inclusion is inviting somebody at the dance to dance. So have you invited somebody just to be in the room and observe, or have you invited somebody into the room to be part of the decision-making, part of the discussion? EDICa's core ethic is co-design. It's sort of fundamentally embedded into the structure of the project, and it's that nothing about us without us. The downside of that is when you are trying to get people who are often a minority, which means that they are often asked to be participants in studies, but they're not getting any benefit from it. The society might benefit from it, but them individually might not be benefiting from them. So building it into a project at the design phase where you're deciding who is going to be a co-investigator. Are you going to provide honorarium for people who are participating into focus groups? That's where this can be really quite useful. Yes, Clay.
I think Sarah might be in our lobby, but she needs access via you.
Okay, let me just have a look.
For those of you that are joining us just recently and maybe don't have a physical sciences background, this is how my entire life is run. You know, the surprises are always good things. They lead you down to an answer that's always interesting and not expected, which is the best part.
Can you take Holly Foss's question? She's asking, is the progression framework available for HEIs, especially engineering departments? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and try and get Sarah into the room.
Karen, can we turn that question over to you? Because my answer will not sound nearly as good as yours. I'm sure of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how good it will sound. It's just, I think my response is probably it is different in terms of the categories that we're looking at, like membership or programs, sorts of programs we run, etc. But on the other hand, I think a lot of it will be quite transferable or adaptable. So I think in principle, it's something that, you know, could quite potentially be used by other sorts of organizations other than professional bodies. But I'd also say in relation to HEIs, yeah, I think it's principle of having a systematic approach is something that could be applied. But then I wouldn't want to point anybody in the wrong direction or reinvent the wheel. And that I suspect there's programs under, you know, organizations like Advanced HE. I'm not sure exactly which organizations to point you to, but I suspect there will be that kind of structure that is available for universities to apply in the way they operate. You might know more.
Karen, do you think that the progression framework is a useful way for individuals or small groups to also sort of monitor, manage their progress with EDI considerations, or is it more uniquely adaptable for professional bodies and larger scale?
Sure, and I see Sarah has arrived, but I'll make it a quick response to that, which is I think there's benefits for individuals from the progression framework being there and from professional bodies implementing that, in that they should be able to expect fairer outcomes. And I think what expect is probably important because there's something about if there's a standard to which we're saying we aspire and which we're aiming to meet, then that's kind of a point of leverage for individuals who might work for that professional body, who might want to be a member, etc., to say, well, you know, you ought to be doing better on X, Y, Z, and there's something robust there that, you know, backs that up. And it's actually, you know, it's good to have challenge from people. It's good to have complaints in terms of when those help us to make things better because we understand, you know, where the gaps are and can address those. So
you're going to get a big virtual hug for that answer. That was a fantastic. Embracing the complaints and the difficulties is, I think, a very good mantra. And it perfectly leads us to Dr. Higginson. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry for a few of the technical hiccups there, and welcome to our seminar today. I'm going to turn over the control to you, and we're going to let you maybe present a little bit about the EDIQ. And after that, yourself, Karen, and I will have a few minutes that maybe to discuss some aspects of the work, and then we'll have a few questions from the audience. Over to you.
I'm really sorry that I had some difficulties getting into the call. I was in the audience somehow. Anyway, I obviously did something
wrong. It's the spice of life.
Indeed. I'm so sorry, everybody. I do actually have some slides. I mean, I think Fionn's probably given away some of the juicy bits, but I'll share my screen anyway and just try and show you some slides. So let's see if we can manage that. And then we want to get that into here. Oh, now we can't see this.
It might be if you hit down in the bottom sort of right-hand screen, if you see the little, it looks like a pull down.
Unfortunately, you can never
screen.
see that. You can never see that in Zoom because you've got a
it's
bar in the way. And so it there's another way of doing it. If anybody can help me, it's under
slideshow.
Under slideshow, that sounds likely, doesn't it? So from the beginning, let's go from there. Excellent. Right. Thank you very much.
Go team.
It's a teamwork indeed. Okay, so my name is Dr. Sarah Higginson, as already been said several times, so I'm going to just skip right on. I'm from CREDS, as somebody's already said, we're really in our final month. It's been a great program, almost 5.5 years, a bit more. And we've had 9 themes. I really recommend our website. It's a blog-based website, really friendly, and it's going to be online for another 5 years. I don't think I really need to tell this group what EDI is, but just to stress that for me, it's not just an administrative, human resources, or even a moral concern. It's really a fundamental component of the work that we do. Helps us to think about who we're working with, what kind of work we're doing, how we're doing that work, and it really helps us to make our research relevant and impactful. And I also believe, from working with lots of people over the last few years on this, that it helps us to find new research gaps that we might not have seen before. Obviously, funders need us to do this, but that's not the only reason to do it. And I really think we need to be careful about EDI washing, as I call it, which this picture is actually a good example of. So, this kind of idea that we kind of gloss over some of the real issues. Very quickly, because you've kind of seen the cube, here it is. Like somebody said, it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. It's got these 3 dimensions to it. It's really a visual aid to help people who really struggle maybe to get all the different kind of ways of thinking about EDI into their head. So we also have an alternative graphical representation because some people struggle to look at the cube and all the information on it. So if people prefer to look at the EDI links or the EDI cogs, they can do that. And those are also on our website. And there was a description already about the difference between equality and equity. So I'll skip through this really quickly. Like was said, equality is giving the same opportunity to everybody in the same way. Equity is making sure that you give it to people, different people in different ways so that they can access it. So it's really about the difference between availability and accessibility. Diversity really is about, as again was said, about understanding difference, whether that's visible or invisible, but making sure that even if something is not protected, not a protected characteristic, it's still respected. And it's really a lot more than tolerance. So we're trying to make sure that we create the sense of belonging. And that's where inclusion comes in. It's really, as again was said earlier, about inviting people to the dance and making you feel like you want to be on the dance floor. But for me, really, it's about starting to tackle systemic inequality. So making sure that we're trying to create systems that work for everybody, such as in this diagram, where everybody can see the view. They don't need to stand on a box. And we need to make sure that when we're thinking about these kinds of systems, we're thinking about sort of past discrimination and barriers as well as current ones. And there are some standards there. There are many others just to take a look at and give yourselves a start. The protected characteristics have been gone through. These are them. They're protected by the Equality Act of 2010, but they're not comprehensive. So, for example, class, caste, and so on, as you can see on this slide, are not protected, but are extremely relevant in determining your life chances, and so still need to be considered. And then we also like to think about intersectionality, which is this idea that people have multiple identities and that these may overlap with each other in different types of ways, sometimes creating overlapping discrimination and disadvantage, or sometimes creating advantages as well. And so we really need to adapt our approach to make sure that we achieve fairness for everybody. And then the third side of the cube is the 3 Ps: people, process, and project or program. And this is the side really that we developed, myself and colleagues who were writing a proposal at the time, which is unfortunately unsuccessful. But really, I think this is where, for me, where the rubber really starts to hit the road. So we're trying to think about who's doing the work. That's all fine. creating diverse teams. That may be an HR thing, but but also who are we working with? Who are stakeholders? Who are the people participating in our projects? And then processes, sure, we're looking at HR processes, like how do we recruit, how do we retain staff and promote people, but also how do we conduct our research? What's our ethical approach? How do we think about, how we run meetings and so forth? So those things are also very important. And then finally, the project, what is the subject under investigation? So have we thought about, EDI in relation to whatever it is that we're doing? So a good example of this in our work, when we started working on this, where we're thinking about racial justice and energy demand, and realized that fuel poverty research, which is quite old now, been going for 30 or 40 years, doesn't really look at race, and that seems to be a big gap. So in other words, this is a really good way of finding gaps, that you can work on in your research, which is, after all, what researchers are interested in doing. And so really this is not the plenary, of course, sorry, I haven't changed the slide, but it starts to help you when you use the slide, use the cube. Usually if I was teaching this, I would have gone through a case study before this slide, and you would have been working on that in groups. And then we would start to think about these types of questions. So what kind of systems are we encountering in our day-to-day lives, and who designs these, who creates these, who's excluded by these, what resources are needed for these, and what we need to be able to operate in these systems. So those are the kinds of questions that sort of underpin the cube. I also wanted to just give a shout out to the EDI working group and CREDS who are pictured in this slide, and just mention a couple of the other things that we've been working on. Because we're so late and I've arrived so late, I'm not going to go into any detail on that, but I'm very happy to answer questions on it. And that's me.
You're hearing my clapping, but everyone else is doing it in spirit. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a fantastic overview of the EDI Cube. And it's also a great lead into a few questions I was hoping to pose to yourself and Karen to sort of, I don't know, get everyone's creative juices flowing and turn this into a constructive step forward, rather than sort of a passive activity. That in mind, one of the things you mentioned that also came across in Karen's discussion was creating diverse teams beyond human resources sort of requirements or standards. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how maybe the tools that you presented, whether it's the EDI Cube or the progression framework, can help interested entities, I guess is the right word, do something that human resources maybe isn't in a position to do themselves, or maybe not in the best position to do. Do you have any views on that or that concept? We'll start with you, Sarah, because you are the most recent panelist, and then we'll hop over to you, Karen.
So, CREDS was a program or a consortium that's quite common in energy research. And one of the things that we found the most liberating in some ways, but also constraining in others, was that we didn't have any access to the contractual arrangements around the people that were working on the program. So everyone was part of institutions. We had 24 institutions, about 150 researchers, and the circumstances under which they were working were determined by their institutions. So CREDS could try and create a culture and so forth, and have an EDI plan. But a lot of the time, whatever was happening in their lives was determined by where they were actually working. Now, that is an interesting thing, because of course you can affect your institutions, and we've tried to do that quite strongly. Like, we've taken quite a few of the things that we're doing and gone to our HR departments in our various institutions and said, hey, do you want to see this recruitment guide, or do you want to see what we've been doing on whatever the thing is? I've been trying to promote the EDI Cube, for example, at Oxford. So we've been trying to do that kind of thing. I don't know if that answers your question, but
that answered it beautifully, actually. That's exactly the kind of insight I wanted. Karen, do you have anything to add or any additional thoughts?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the progression framework. There is a section in it which is about employment, about professional bodies as employers and their staff, and that's important. But if it was only about that, then really the impact would be on, a very small number of people. I don't know exactly how many across professional bodies, but in the numbers of thousands, rather than the whole profession for engineering, which is really our kind of aim. And I think going beyond human resources and employment is very important as a determinant of people's outcomes around equality and people's experiences and life chances, but it's not the only thing. And, thinking about engineering specifically, there's a big factor is actually engineering solutions and outcomes, products, if you like, and how to make sure that those are meeting the needs of diverse end users, that they're not failing on one or more counts in respect of maybe disabled people or, on for different reasons. So I think that's a really important factor, and that reflects why we're targeting our work very much on the kind of externally facing stuff that professional bodies do. So a great deal of the profession framework is about things like all their functions like accreditation, membership, and so on, but also how they deliver programs, and that applies to the Royal Academy of Engineering too. And our D&I team at the Academy is very, very externally focused. So really our target is the engineering profession as a whole rather than us as an employer at the Academy. And I think that's something that was quite refreshing coming into this role, because I've worked in this sort of area for a little while, and it's good to see that emphasis on we're trying to see the bigger picture and apply this to the bigger picture rather than are we doing well as an employer, which nonetheless is important.
I find that fascinating, especially because one of the things that I really am curious about when I talk about the progression framework or the EDI cube is, what kind of challenges did you face in the development and implementation of these tools? One of the things I most like about EDI conversations is that many of the people that are involved in that conversation have faced significant difficulties or challenges in their own life. And knowing that there's tools out there that can help us deal with those things and in fact be part of that is pretty empowering to me. And I was wondering if you could give me, I don't know, some ideas about some of the things that you ran into and how you overcame them, or maybe things that you're still struggling with. For some reason, that really highlights to me paths forward and constructive, productive ways of tackling challenges that can otherwise be quite problematic. We'll start with you this time, Karen, since I put Sarah in the hot seat first last time.
Sure. So I can't speak very much to the development of a progression framework in its early days, in that I really only joined the Academy a little while back, but I can see from looking at it and the documentation and everything that there would have been certain challenges around, for example, again, not wanting to reinvent the wheel and wanting to build on things that already exist. For example, doing that research to establish, what kind of tools are there out there and what's our starting point. I think it's about usability of the tool, making sure that there's a balance between sorry, being as comprehensive as possible, but also being accessible to the user. So that's something which is always going to be tricky in terms of, it's quite a big thing. I think there's about 10 areas, and there's then data on your organization and quite a lot to put in. So how do you make sure that it's going to get the uptake because it's usable enough? And I think at the moment, the sorts of challenges we're looking at are things like data collection, which frankly is like a challenge in terms of EDI, generically. But particularly, I think, with what are often smaller organizations, and even to the point of, does some of this quite make sense, or does it work for very small organizations? Which also goes to the point about capacity and size of those organizations and how they can resource the work. So yeah, I think those are probably our key challenges. Sorry, I've got a cough today.
No, I didn't even notice. I was wondering as well, before we hop over to Sarah, have you ever faced any sort of resistance to the implementation of the progression framework? Are there people that don't see the value in it, or is it something that's fairly universally accepted, even if the effort is underappreciated?
I feel like, as to the best of my knowledge, our professional bodies are really engaging very positively with it, and there's good uptake. There's not like 100% uptake, and that's something I'd love to be able to address. But I can very much imagine some of the reasons why that would be. And I mentioned about resourcing. I mentioned about usability of the tool and the investment of time and all the rest of it. To respond to everything and to do this benchmarking and to be involved in the steering group. And we're not asking for absolutely nothing here. It's, but obviously there is going to be work to be done to actually get those outcomes, but persuading people that there's a link between doing this particular thing and the outcomes that I think are well accepted in engineering generally, that we need to have a more diverse profession, that we need to build more inclusive cultures, making sure that that's really visible, I think is hopefully the key to unblocking those who aren't currently able to engage for whatever reason.
I agree 100%. It's so fun to be around like-minded people, but not identical. It's awesome. Sarah, let's bump over to you. Just to refresh your memory, we were asking about challenges you faced during the development and implementation of your tools, and any kind of, pushback that maybe you've experienced would be very much, I'd be very much interested in hearing about that. And thank you so much, Karen, for your answers.
Sure. So, basically my background is in designing processes and that kind of thing. And I really like things that feel kind of tangible and practical. And so EDI, there's a lot of different definitions around and a lot of different, and some people seem to be confused. It didn't seem confusing to me, but a lot of people seem to be confused. And so I kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just get everything in one place, and it'd just be all together. And then I came up with this idea for the cube. So to be honest, I decided to do it. I was able to do it. The main thing that was a problem was finding the time, because it was just my own thing that I wanted to do. I was allowed to do it, but I had so many other things to do. So I had the idea for the cube, 18 months ago, but it's only just gone on the website. It's only just got finished. The cube was designed quite a long time ago, but it's the resource, and even now the resource is not as complete as I would like it to be, and we'll probably run out of time before that gets done. And then funnily enough, I haven't really had any pushback. In fact, the cube seems to have developed a life of its own. I think I've delivered it 9 or 10 times without ever trying to promote it in any way. So I've been invited to all kinds of summer schools and MSc student courses and all kinds of things, conferences and so forth, to present it without ever really trying very hard. The main sort of challenge, I guess, though, is the one that I mentioned earlier, that because CREDS is ending and we're a consortium, the cube is part of what the consortium knows. And so we have tried really hard to make sure that everything that we know is on our website and will be handed forward to the next centre that is coming out to work on energy demand research. But unless, and I did try to get it integrated into Oxford as one of the institutions that is involved in CREDS. But just at the key moment when I was trying to get that done, the key person left, and the new person is overwhelmed by her new job because it's a crazy job in research services. And so embedding it in Oxford hasn't been possible. So it belongs to CREDS, and I will probably take it with me under my wing and see if I can find a way to get it to live outside of CREDS. But that it's an infant process, I suppose. And so, yeah.
It's very inspiring to hear that. I have to admit, I have the cube hanging up in my lab on the wall right over there, because I think it really captures a sense of simplicity, but enough comprehensiveness that you can capture a lot of the issues that arise, even if it's not all of them. Also, secretly, my undergraduate degree was in fine art, and I think it looks fantastic, which it matters to me, even if it's
luckily, we have a fantastic designer who never wants to be accredited, but her name is Stephanie Ferguson. She's looking for a job, actually. She's absolutely brilliant. Actually, I think she's going to work for herself, but she can easily manage. But anyway, she did such a great job, and she drew all the other pictures as well, or design them for me. So, she's just fantastic. And as you say, it really does help. I guess when I originally imagined the toolkit, it was a bit more like the tool that Karen's been describing, and I thought it could be like a checklist. But when somebody who was better than me at maths said, "Oh, well, that requires 81 options, I was like, oof, that's a bit much.
It's a big
EDI
cube.
people might not really want to think about 81 options, and like it's not clear that would be very helpful. So really, I then decided to create it as an inspiration to help people. And really, the idea is that you can use it in a workshop, which it works really well. But really, the idea is that individuals be able to use it when they're thinking about designing projects, really at the starting place, where they first say, I've got this great idea. Oh, I wonder how I can integrate EDI into that. And think about it at that stage so that it helps to inspire thinking. And that means that EDI is really embedded in everything that they do, so that they even think about their budget, their data design plan, all of that. But how does EDI impact here? And the cube can help them to do that, which then means they don't need to worry about their EDI plan, right? Because it's just there, it just pops right out of the research. So.
I wish I could ask you both questions. I want this to be my seminar just for me, but for better or for worse, that's not the way it is. So there's a couple questions in the Q&A that I was going to pose to you. The first being to you, Sarah. Someone asked, they were interested in your EDI washing and asked if you could add a little bit to this. I would love to hear the same, because I think I understand the concept, but a little bit more information would be fantastic, especially from experts such as yourself. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit more about EDI washing?
Sure. When you first said that, I was like, EDI washing, I don't know what you mean, but I did say that, I do remember. So first of all, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, and but I have some experience of talking about this, just mainly out of enthusiasm. So what I mean by EDI washing is this idea that we can kind of like add a bit of EDI, but keep everything the same, and that really we're not challenging the systems that make the problems happen in the first place. Now, and so that's really why we want to create inclusive systems. We want to try and design. So there's a good example from sort of working with disability in architecture. So when people first started thinking about how disabled people or people in wheelchairs might access buildings, they were like, oh, well, that's the person's problem, right? They've got the problem. They've got the disability, up to them to sort it out, Then they said, oh, well, we'll put in a ramp. Great. Now there's access. Nowadays, people design accessible buildings. So nobody has to come into the building in a different way. Like, you don't have to have a separate ramp or a separate whatever, because they think about it from the beginning. How can everybody access this building? And that's eventually what we want to try and do, is create systems that include everybody so that everybody can thrive and contribute their best work. Now, of course, that's deeply challenging. We've got infrastructures, like I said in the reflection questions, that really mitigate against that. And those infrastructures, some of them are hardwired into our society, like our transport infrastructures and so forth. And those are not going anywhere in a hurry. But it's really about thinking about those things and challenging those things at a deep level, and not just thinking that you can add a picture of, racially diverse group of hands, which is on that slide that I talk about. I think that takes care of the problem. I mean, that's something, but it's definitely not everything.
Fantastic response again. We have a few minutes left, and so I wanted to pose one more quick question to Karen. That was something that came up in the chat earlier, and it was, do you think we're looking at two different scales with the EDI cube and the progression framework in some sense? One is that you have an overarching body that's giving rules and regulations sort of downward, and one is the EDI cube that can be used by an individual such as myself, meaning you start change from down and push up. Karen, I was wondering if you had any ideas or thoughts about, I don't want to say if one's better than the other, because I don't think that's the right question, but how they fit together. Do you see that the progression framework and the cube are something that come together, or do you think they're two pieces of the puzzle that complement each other without directly interacting themselves? That's probably a really hard question to ask at the end of a seminar, so any thoughts are welcome. Even too bad for you, Clay. That's also a legitimate answer.
No, sure. I kind of want to relate it to the question about EDI washing as well, because there's something about that. So I guess the progression framework is a sort of maturity model around where are you on a set of 4 indicators towards delivering, good practice around EDI across everything you do, essentially, which is a big ask. And I was going to say really about the for EDI washing, it's sort of, obviously you can't have the words on a bit of paper, but without the actual change or actually anything happening is something that, that does happen. And at the same time, it can be difficult to know the difference because it is, it's slightly hackneyed to say, but it's a journey as far as nobody comes out perfect and stays that way. And there's always going to be things that need doing. There's always more to do. But you can sometimes tell when it's not authentic. But I think from a point of view of it being top down versus bottom up, my view of the progression framework would be yes, it is top down in that we're setting out this framework and this is what we're saying is the set of things to aim for. And we're sort of saying if you do these things, good results will happen. And we're reasonably confident in that. But in terms of how people actually deliver it and how people act in line with the framework, that's a bottom-up thing. That will be down to how their individual organizations work, what their particular needs are. It's going to be much more individual. And then, something like the EDI Cube, where, you can conceptualize all of this, I can see that being entirely helpful for the organizations that we're working with in terms of how do they approach it, as opposed to, right, what are the things in the framework that we need to do. It's that approach to it and the understanding and developing those internal conversations too. So I do see them as complementary, I think, is my short answer.
The insights are fantastic. Sarah, we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to see if you have anything to add to the question that I just posed to Karen, or other points that you might want to bring up before we sort of conclude today's seminar. I also want a brief chance to say thank you to you both before we hang up, so to speak. So over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Karen. I think that they could be, I mean, I don't know much about her framework, but I'm interested. I'm going to go and find out about it and maybe be in touch with you, Karen. I mean, I think a formal framework that allows you to assess your progress and monitor what you're doing and kind of track what's happening, and in relation to others. So there's a definite lack of data around EDI and understanding where we are, where we're trying to get to, and how that relates to each other, not in a competitive sense, but in a, for me anyway, personally, in a way that we can support each other and kind of work towards something together. And, I mean, I think that bottom-up things are great, but top-down is also a good idea because, you've got to have frameworks that you kind of fit within. I mean, the EDI Cube could be adapted to be top-down. I mean, I've just sent it to the next investment that comes after Creds, and I believe that they're using it to help inspire their EDI plan. So, I mean, that will then inform how they do EDI. I mean, they're very informed by EDI. I mean, EDI is really woven into what they're doing, hopefully partly because of the Cube. So in a sense, that's a bit of a top-down thing that they're doing. They're kind of saying, here's the framework. You need to fit within that if you want to be part of this program. So it could be used in that way, but it's not the same. I mean, it's only a brand new tool, I guess. It's not been designed to sort of fit to work in that way. In a way, to be honest, if I continued and done the work on thinking about it as an evaluation tool, I probably would have done a bit more of that work. So that work remains to be done. If anyone wants to
something to look forward to,
come and let me know.
I want to thank both of our guests today, Sarah Higginson and Karen Grayson, for their time. Thank you for being here with us. I think the best compliment I can ever give you is I feel empowered to make myself, my lab, my culture, and sort of the research and innovation sector better, not because I have to, but because I want to. That's not something I come across very often. And I really want to thank both of you for putting that into play and bringing that passion and that energy here with us today. I also want to thank everyone that joined us. We had very good turnout for this today, which is a huge shout out to the EDI community and the interest level that surrounds this work. So thank you all for joining us. I think Fenella has a slide to put up quickly as sort of a takeaway slide. For what it's worth, in spirit anyway, please join me in giving a hand of applause to our two speakers. There's also, I think there's little like emoji buttons at the bottom somewhere that you can try to use. They're a little too technologically advanced for my brain at the moment, apparently, but Thank you so much for your time. It was a fantastic presentation and discussion, and I really think you set a fantastic tone for future EDICa seminars, hopefully which we'll be able to have you on again. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. You can see there's some active calls for participants going out. Please check out the progression framework and the EDI Cube, which have links for both in the chat. And have a great rest of your week. It looks like it might be a little cold if you're joining us from the UK, but if you're not, revel in the beautiful weather you hopefully have wherever you are. Thank you again to everyone, and have a fantastic afternoon. You've certainly made my day a lot better. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.